I saw the other day with Alex Eala, yeah, that's been a talk, and which is understandable. There's some.
Here's the moment. Federer and Novak. Greatness, recognizing greatness.
Yeah. Tell you what.
Kids, Tara and Stefan, they're at home. So how do they support you from home? Do they get the permission to wake up in the middle of the night?
No, absolutely not.
Can you tell us about the match earlier? Seems very interesting.
Yeah, it was super fun. My very first mix double.
Novak Djokovic drops bombshell. She's the biggest we've seen. The Eala phenomenon and Australian Open's beautiful chaos exposed. Welcome back to Champions Tennisitics, the only place where we don't just watch the match. We dissect the madness, the glory, and the secrets behind the headlines. If you're new here, buckle up, because we're about to take you on a wild ride through the corridors of Melbourne Park where chaos meets glory, and where a 20-year-old Filipino superstar just forced the tennis world to completely rewrite the rulebook. Have you ever imagined that success could turn into a nightmare? Or that fame could become the very prison from which there is no escape? What I'm about to reveal right now isn't just another passing press statement from a tired athlete going through the motions. This is a surgical dissection of a reality that is both terrifying and absolutely breathtaking at the same time. Novak Djokovic, the living legend of tennis, the man who has literally seen everything there is to see in this sport, just broke his silence to reveal what truly happens behind the glamorous curtain in Melbourne. And trust me, what he admitted about the logistical chaos surrounding the rising Filipino sensation Eala might permanently change how you view professional tennis forever. Is the Australian Open facing a catastrophic organizational failure that could threaten its reputation as the happy slam? Or is this absolute bedlam simply the inevitable price of greatness that everyone must pay? And why on earth does Djokovic believe that suffocating overcrowding, 4-hour wait times, and stadium-crushing fan invasions are actually the best problems in the world? We're diving deep into the pandemonium, the passion, and the so-called good problem that is shaking the very foundations of Melbourne Park. This story is bigger than just forehands and backhands. It's about the future of tennis itself and whether the sport can handle its own explosive global expansion. The whole situation started innocently enough. A reporter in the packed press room at Melbourne Park asked Novak about the vibes at this year's tournament and how the Australian Open has evolved over his incredible 2-decade career. Seems innocent enough, right? Just another routine question for the 24-time Grand Slam champion. But Novak's answer took everyone in that room on a time-traveling journey 20 years into the past, painting a picture that stands in stark, almost shocking contrast to the gleaming, corporate-sponsored giant we witness today. Picture the scene with me for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine a young Novak Djokovic, fresh-faced and hungry, somewhere around 2003 or 2005. The exact date matters far less than the location and the conditions. There were no luxurious glass palaces back then. No hypermodern recovery pods filled with cutting-edge technology. No player lounges that look like they belong in a 5-star resort. Do you know where the legends of tennis used to train during the Australian summer? Do you know where the future titans of the sport prepared their bodies for battle against the brutal Melbourne heat? A gym, and not even a purpose-built tennis facility. They were using a borrowed gym that belonged to the Collingwood Football Club. Let that sink in for a moment. Djokovic remembers those days with a peculiar mix of warm nostalgia and genuine shock at the sheer scale of transformation that has occurred. Imagine world champions, future Hall of Famers, sharing ice baths and rusted weight equipment in a facility across the road from the tennis venue, literally dodging Australian Football League players who were training for their own season. Novak even had a self-deprecating laugh during the press conference about mixing up the rival football clubs, Essendon and Collingwood, apologizing to the Australian journalists in the room. That's how raw and unglamorous it was back then. That's how far removed from today's reality. From those humble, almost comically gritty beginnings, Melbourne Park exploded into something entirely different. It transformed from a borrowed football gym into what can only be described as a national tennis empire. Today we see state-of-the-art indoor courts with perfect climate control, recovery rooms that look like they belong in a science fiction movie, player dining facilities that rival seven-star hotels in both quality and presentation, and training centers that incorporate every possible advantage modern sports science can offer. Tennis Australia wasn't just hosting a tournament anymore. They were systematically building a kingdom, a fortress of tennis excellence designed to attract the best players in the world and keep them coming back year after year. But here's the thing about empires. With every great empire comes the inevitable flood of people wanting to be part of it. And this is where we reach the critical issue that everyone whispers about in the corridors, but few want to address directly. The overcrowding problem that has been building like pressure in a volcano for the past several years. Has Melbourne Park become too tight for its own good? Has the tournament transformed into a commercial monster that is slowly swallowing its own soul? The complaints have been rising steadily, year after year. Fans are grumbling openly about the difficulty of getting into popular courts. The crushing lines for everything from merchandise to bathrooms to simple entry points. The oppressive heat combined with crowds that feel unbearable and almost dangerous in their density. The Happy Slam, as the Australian Open has affectionately been called for years, is starting to feel to many attendees like the claustrophobic slam or the survival slam. Tournament officials have heard the complaints. The media has reported on the frustrations. Everyone knows there's an issue. So what does Novak Djokovic, one of the most respected voices in tennis, have to say about this growing resentment? His response was not what anyone expected. It was shocking in its directness. It was like a perfectly placed serve smashing down the tee line that nobody could return. He looked the reporter directly in the eye and said it coldly, clearly, and with absolute conviction. It is a problem, but it is a very good problem to have. Yes, you heard that absolutely right. Djokovic genuinely believes that packed stadiums bursting at the seams, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder in walkways, and tickets that sell out in literal milliseconds are not a crisis that needs fixing. They are the dream. They are exactly what the sport needs. He completely flipped the script on the entire narrative that had been building in the media. He asked everyone in that room, and by extension everyone watching around the world, to imagine the complete opposite scenario for just a moment. Imagine arriving at a Grand Slam and seeing empty stands stretching out before you. Imagine a deadly, uncomfortable silence where you can hear every single shoe squeak, every ball bounce, every awkward cough echoing through cavernous, half-filled stadiums. That is the true nightmare that haunts Novak Djokovic's vision of tennis, not the long lines, not the sweat, not the organizational chaos. He articulated it perfectly when he said, "I think there are much worse problems to have than this one. Obviously, we want more attention, more people coming and wanting to watch the tennis live." The man is operating on a completely different level of strategic thinking. He's a visionary who understands that silence and emptiness represent the slow death of any sport. Overcrowding, as uncomfortable as it might be in the moment, signals life, growth, and a thriving future. But the story didn't end with that philosophical observation about crowds and success. Oh no. The most controversial, electrically charged moment of the entire press conference came when the conversation shifted to one specific name. A name that is currently causing seismic tremors across Southeast Asia and reverberating right here in the heart of Melbourne Park. A name that has become synonymous with possibility, representation, and the changing face of professional tennis. Eala, the golden girl of the Philippines. The 20-year-old left-hander who has captured the imagination of an entire nation and is now forcing the Australian Open to confront the consequences of its own global appeal. The situation surrounding Eala's first-round match wasn't just slightly poor organization or a minor scheduling hiccup. It was a full-scale fan explosion that apparently nobody in tournament management predicted, except, perhaps, the Filipino fans themselves, who knew exactly what was coming. And Djokovic, with the kind of experience that weighs as much as mountains and speaks with the authority of someone who has navigated every possible scenario in this sport, admitted the uncomfortable truth that some organizers tried desperately to downplay or avoid addressing directly. He validated the chaos. He called it exactly what it was. He acknowledged the criticism head-on, saying, "You could argue that it was, maybe a poor schedule." Coming from Djokovic, That's a diplomatic but crystal clear admission that tournament officials made a significant miscalculation. But then he did something even more important. He explained why that miscalculation happened and why it actually represents something beautiful rather than something broken. Let's fully visualize the scene that NOVAK is referencing, because the details matter enormously here. It's Monday afternoon in Melbourne. The sun is beating down with that particular Australian intensity that reminds you why they call this the Summer Slam. The location is Court 6. This is not Rod Laver Arena. This is not Margaret Court Arena. This is not even one of the larger show courts. Court 6 is what's known in tennis as an outer court, designed specifically for intimate viewing experiences. It holds maybe a few hundred people comfortably. It's meant for early round matches featuring lower-ranked players, qualifiers, doubles matches, and competitors who don't typically draw massive crowds. It's a perfectly nice venue for what it's designed to do. But Eala is playing her first-round match on Court 6. And that's when everything went completely sideways. Suddenly, without warning, the lines are snaking around the entire block. We're not talking about a few dozen extra people. We're talking about thousands. The neighboring food courts, which are supposed to be places where fans grab a quick bite between matches, have completely transformed into overflow fan zones packed with people who couldn't get anywhere near the actual court. Thousands of Filipino fans, along with curious tennis supporters who heard about the commotion, are pressing desperately against the fences, standing on tiptoes, climbing on anything they can find, all desperate to catch even the tiniest glimpse of the 20-year-old left-hander who has become a sporting avatar for an entire nation of over 110 million people. It was absolute, uncontrolled pandemonium. Tournament organizers were visibly in panic mode, running around with radios and worried expressions. Security personnel were completely overwhelmed, trying to manage crowd flow in an area that was never designed for this kind of density. The situation was bordering on dangerous at several points. And why did this happen? Because someone in scheduling made the catastrophic decision to put a star with the gravitational pull of an entire nation on a court the size of a suburban backyard. And Novak Djokovic? He witnessed this scene, heard about the chaos, and processed it from a completely different angle than the frazzled tournament officials. He doesn't see a logistical failure that needs to be covered up or apologized for. He sees something far more significant. He sees the birth of a new tennis superpower. He sees the exact kind of passion and energy that the sport desperately needs to thrive in the 21st century. She is coming from the Philippines, Novak said during the press conference, and you could actually see his eyes light up as he spoke. There was genuine excitement in his voice, which is now a big deal. She's been the biggest ever tennis player from that country. He paused for emphasis, letting that statement sink in, and then he delivered the quote that will be replayed on Filipino television for years to come. She's the biggest we've seen. Let me repeat that because it's monumentally important. She's the biggest we've seen. That single sentence will ring out in Manila, in Cebu, in Davao, and in Filipino communities all over the world. When the GOAT, the universally acknowledged greatest of all time in men's tennis, looks into a camera and calls you the biggest ever player from your country, that is not just a polite compliment. That is not just a nice thing to say to be diplomatic. That is a coronation. That is validation at the highest possible level. That is Novak Djokovic, who has shared courts with Federer and Nadal, who has battled through every era of modern tennis, officially recognizing that something significant is happening here. Djokovic continued by pointing out what should have been obvious to everyone involved in scheduling. The Philippines is a massive country with a population exceeding 110 million people. It's a nation that is absolutely hungry for sporting glory on the international stage, starving for heroes who can represent them at the highest levels of global competition. And Eala is feeding that hunger in a way that no Filipino tennis player has ever done before. The pressure surrounding her, the overcrowding at her matches, and the chaos erupting around her court assignments is not a problem to be solved. It's definitive proof that tennis is still alive, still breathing, still expanding into new territories that were previously untapped markets. Yes, it absolutely creates a logistical nightmare to manage these kinds of crowds during the first few days of a Grand Slam. The big showcase courts like Rod Laver Arena and Margaret Court Arena are traditionally reserved for the established household names, the top 10 seeds, the former champions, and the players who have earned their spots through years of consistent excellence. The schedule is already packed to the absolute bursting point with matches that need to be completed, television commitments that must be honored, and a complex ballet of court assignments that takes weeks of planning. Adding unexpected crowd surges for players outside the traditional hierarchy creates genuine headaches for the tournament director and their entire team. But as Novak so eloquently points out, just imagine for a moment if no one came to watch these matches. Imagine if Court 6 sat there half empty while Eala played her heart out. That would be the real catastrophe. That would be the scenario that should terrify everyone who loves this sport. And here's the thing that makes this situation even more fascinating. It's not just Eala. What we're witnessing right now in Melbourne is nothing short of a revolution. The Australian Open is rapidly becoming the tournament of what I'm calling the tennis diaspora. It's becoming the Grand Slam, where previously underrepresented nations are planting their flags and declaring their presence in the loudest possible way. Look at what happened the very next day after the Eala chaos. It was Janice Jin's turn to create her own earthquake. Jin represents Indonesia, another absolutely massive nation located just a short flight from Australia's shores. Indonesia has a population of over 270 million people, making it the fourth most populous country on Earth, and they have been almost completely absent from elite tennis for the entire modern era. Janice Jin, who just recently emerged from college tennis at Pepperdine University in California, walked onto a Melbourne court and proceeded to take down a Grand Slam finalist, Canada's Leylah Fernandez, in a match that nobody saw coming. But the result itself is almost secondary to the atmosphere that Jin generated. This wasn't a polite, genteel tennis match with scattered applause. This was a soccer riot transported into a tennis venue. The 3,000 seats of the ANZ Arena were literally rocking and shaking. Red and white Indonesian flags were everywhere you looked, waving frantically with every point. Chants of "Let's go Janice" were battling against the contingent of Filipino-Canadian fans supporting Leylah Fernandez, who herself represents the new multicultural face of tennis. The noise level was absolutely deafening. It was raw, unfiltered passion, and it was absolutely beautiful to witness. Jin captured the feeling perfectly when she told reporters afterward, "I'm having that feeling where it feels a little bit like home." Think about what that means. An Indonesian player, competing in Australia, feeling at home because of the sheer number of Indonesian fans who made the journey or who live in Australia and came out to support her. That's the kind of thing that builds the sport for generations to come. And let's not forget the other examples that are piling up. Turkish fans swarming Court 7 for Zeynep Sönmez, creating a sea of red and white and generating an atmosphere that felt more like Istanbul than Melbourne. The Brazilian army painting entire sections of the grounds in yellow and green for teenage sensation João Fonseca, who at just 18 years old is being called the next big thing in men's tennis and is carrying the hopes of an entire continent on his shoulders. These are not isolated incidents. This is a pattern. This is the new reality. This is exactly what Novak Djokovic is talking about when he references the evolution of the tournament with such obvious enthusiasm. The Australian Open is no longer just about the traditional tennis powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia itself, France, Spain, and the usual suspects. Those nations will always be important, always be well represented. But the gates have now crashed wide open. We are seeing a World Cup atmosphere descending upon Melbourne Park, transforming it from an elite tennis tournament into a genuinely global celebration of the sport. But let's circle back specifically to the Eala incident, because it really does highlight both the incredible opportunities and the genuine growing pains of this new era in tennis. Bernard Manens, a Filipino fan who traveled to Melbourne specifically to watch Eala play, told reporters a story that perfectly encapsulates the situation. His wife waited in line for 4 hours just to get a seat on Court 6. For full hours. Let that number sink in for a moment. Imagine standing in the brutal Australian summer heat, in a slow-moving line that barely seems to progress, for 4 solid hours just to see a first-round match. These aren't people trying to see the final. This isn't a championship match. This is literally the first round of the tournament. Bernard himself wasn't even as lucky as his wife. He never made it into the court at all and had to watch the entire match from one of the overcrowded food court screens, standing among hundreds of other Filipino fans who were shut out. But here's the remarkable part. Did they complain? Did they demand refunds? Did they post angry messages on social media about the poor organization? No. They cheered. They roared. They celebrated every single point as if it was match point for the championship.
Kids, Tara and Stefan, they're at home. So how do they support you from home? Do they get the permission to wake up in the middle of the night?
No, absolutely not. They're sleeping right now. And, you know, so they were allowing the Australian Open to use their facilities and the bigger gym, you know, ice baths and everything.
I think it's only normal that with the loss comes disappointment and being upset. But then again, it's an